So, welcome to our 6th KAZOOcon. I think I got that right. And the audience members are telling me yes, so that's good. How many people were actually here for the first KAZOOcon? All right. I see like 4 hands. James over there. And the second, I'm not going to go through all of them. Okay, so if you're here for the first 2, so that tells me that most of you actually don't know the history of where we kind of started. And we're a pretty unusual company. We started the company in my apartment, in my, I don't know, 400 square foot San Francisco cubbyhole. And we were had to be pretty crafty. We are not a VC-backed, unlike typical Silicon Valley, we are not a VC-backed or angel-backed firm. We just kind of are crazy, I guess, and decided we would use up our life savings making free software. And that's what we did. But we had a dream, which I'm going to go into in a little bit. But I'm really excited at this, because for me, this is pretty cool. Some of you will recognize some of these photos that are on this slide, but most of you will not. So let me just tell you where we've kind of come from. On the left-hand side of the screen is a picture of a venue called The Drake. The Drake is a dance nightclub, and Patrick throws parties there for New Year's once in a while and convinced the owner to give us that venue for free so we could hold our first KAZOOcon because we had no money. And I will never forget the expression on the Sprint senior regional manager's face when she walked in on her suit and was looking very elegant, and her feet stuck to the floor from the beer that was on the nightclub's floor that could not ever be removed. So we went from there to this place called Broadway Studios, which was a big step up for us, where we were actually able to have a real venue. Of course, this venue was still the only one we could probably afford in San Francisco, where if you pay any attention to real estate, you know how expensive that is. And the reason this was cheap is because the venue was okay, but it was crammed right in between the strip club section. So when you exited the venue, you had your choice of entertainment for the evening, we'll call it. So we're really happy that you guys all joined us, and those of you who've been along for that adventure know that we've grown. We've grown quite a bit, and now we're on a beach in San Diego. So this is really exciting to our team and to our staff, and we thank you all for joining us in this adventure. But those humble beginnings are for a reason, and I'm kind of going to speak for Carl, our CTO, a little bit in this presentation, so hopefully he doesn't get mad at me because he hasn't seen these slides. But we still actually are at our roots for what we're building and why through all this. So I like to go down memory lane a little bit and review this. I started this journey, and I'm going to argue that Carl started this journey really 30 years ago, so I'm getting old. And when I say that, what I mean is that we were kids, and telecom, I know it's weird, but telecom was kind of a fun thing for us. We didn't intend to make this a business. We didn't really think about why we liked it, I guess. We just kind of did. And we also didn't know each other then. But we were both on this sort of weird path where we had explored telecom, and it was our passion. And we kind of looked at the phone network as this magical black box that connected the world. It is, and I still argue, still today, is one of the most powerful and most interconnected networks out there. Because every single person on the planet can be reached by a phone in most cases, or some sort of mobile or cellular device. And even your data networks secretly actually still run on most of the infrastructure that was put there by the phone companies. So this is very relevant technology for us, and it took 100 years plus to build, right? So it's not like those telephone poles you see on the side of the street were installed 10 years ago. It took a long time to put all this infrastructure in place. So on the one hand, this was like this fascinating network, but on the other hand, it was also really broken. There had been a lot of duct tape on building this network. A lot of people made decisions they thought were good ones. Some people maybe make decisions intentionally to cut some corners, but there's a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of things that were just dated. And you know, hindsight's always 20/20. It's not that the inventors of these technologies knew where they would go. They probably had no idea what they were doing at the time and how popular some of their inventions would be. But the reality is that as we sort of transitioned into IP-based networks versus analog and even digital networks, there was kind of a transformation happening. And I think Carl and I, and a lot of you guys, were watching this happen and kind of watching the idiosyncrasies of some of these items. So through a bunch of sort of random coincidences and funny emails, and I don't have all day to talk about this, so I'm going to summarize what took several years very quickly. Carl and I managed to run into each other through some open source projects, and we quickly realized that we had very similar goals and very similar ideas on how we could kind of change things. And that kind of leads us to today. I'm jumping a whole bunch of pieces here, where well, not quite today yet. In 2005, Carl and myself and several others, some of the folks in the FreeSwitch team as well, were actually a little ahead of us on this. Even other folks that have nothing to do with this project but saw some of the concepts. Twilio is kind of a funny story. We were working out of a coffee shop when it got annoying to work out of my apartment every day. And it turns out Twilio was 2 coffee shops over down the street starting their company. So when people always ask me, how do you compare to Twilio, I say, well, I probably chose better coffee at the day, I guess. So the reality is that we were just trying to fix some simple problems when we started this, but we both, and I think subconsciously, had a vision of the whole network and someday fixing a lot more of the pieces than we even envisioned back then. And you know, you start a journey like that with the first step, and you also kind of make some assumptions, and we thought some things like, we're going to get this done really quickly, it's going to be kind of simple, we're going to make it modular, we're going to make it do all these things, it should only take a couple years to reach the full vision, and here we are in 2019, and frankly we still haven't even finished the vision. So obviously we underestimated the time maybe that it would take. But one of the interesting things in that is, even a lot of our own staff, when they work with me, they come to me sometimes and they say, you've changed everything. And I love getting that comment, because I always got to scratch my head and say, well, did I? And I pull up like my Excel sheets that say all the things we're going to build from 2011. And I'm like, this list is literally still accurate. We're still building the same thing. I was lucky with Carl, because it turns out that he kind of had the same vision that I did. And Carl and I, it's kind of weird when we talk. It's a little spooky, actually. I don't know if it's weird that I'm talking about you even right now while he's sitting back there. Hi, Carl. But we can almost finish each other's conversations when we talk about this technology, because we just think that similarly in terms of what we think the things should do and how we think it's broken and how we want to kind of proceed. The problem, however, is both of us kind of have gotten so used to how simple it is in our heads, how the world should work versus how it does work, that we have also grown the company and hired staff and moved along this vision, kind of assuming that the rest of the world is on board with us too. And in the last couple of years, we've grown significantly, a little quickly actually. And one of the pieces of baggage that comes with growth is you have to get everyone else on the same page, and you have to make sure they really are, and you have to train them, and you have to teach them. And so if you have an assumption that they already know everything, then that's not going to go very well. So Mel, actually, who introduced me here earlier this morning, was probably the first time I'd been promising my staff forever that I was going to finally sit down and write up what's in my brain, like write up all the things on how I think the software should be built and where we're going with this. And it occurred to me I'd never really done that. And I had said that over and over and over for almost a year, that I was going to do this, and I just never made the time. And then when we hired Mel, and she was supposed to be in charge of making sure that all of you guys are actually happy, I realized that she really needs to know how the system works, otherwise she's not going to make you guys happy, because her whole role with her team is to answer your questions and provide you the right resources. So I said to her, I'm going to make a simple chart, and I'm going to do it right now while we're sitting here. I said, I'm not going to put this off anymore. This is your welcome to the company. We're going to sit here and we're going to go through this. And I started drawing it out, and I was going to make this really simple chart, and I started writing each of the components we were working on, and oops, it kind of ended up looking like that. So it wasn't simple. Turns out it's very complicated. And this actually caused me to step back and be like, oh yeah, now I get why nobody understands what I'm usually asking them for. So the cool thing is this hasn't changed. Carl looked at this and he's like, yeah, this is correct. But I don't think anyone else had any idea that this is what we were trying to build, and that includes some of our own customers. And those of you who are squinting your eyes trying to read this, don't worry, we're gonna zoom in on some of these items. But I'm first gonna summarize sort of how I see the world. And let's see, I've been trying to figure out how to use PowerPoint's Zoom this morning. Let's see if I can get this right. You know what? I'm gonna cheat, because I messed this up. So the first thing I realized when I drew that slide is that I'm really a terrible designer. So I went to our marketing folks and I said, can you make this look simpler? And we actually sat for quite a while and tried to figure out how to make it look a little nicer. And in doing that, I realized that I could collapse some of these concepts into a simpler slide and then have another slide that expands on them. So we came up with this. Now, again, you guys in the audience aren't going to be able to read this, so I'm going to zoom in here, and hopefully I do this correctly and quickly. Okay. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see, hopefully, can you guys see that? I'll zoom in even more. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see what I'll call sort of the focus areas or the categories that I think the telecom network and really communications systems in general can be broken into. So you'll see those sort of vertical lines, so you might have to tilt your head a little to read that. And basically it starts at what are called CPE devices. That's an old school term. Really the customer premise or the stuff that people use, right? That's sitting on their desk, or your laptops even today are really a CPE device to some degree, or your fax machine or those kinds of things. So the telecoms had a concept of CPE devices for eternity, but we don't always remember that that's actually what we're servicing, right? We're servicing the people who are sitting behind those and the devices themselves, and that's kind of where everything starts. And those CPE devices also tie in these days to a customer network and some ISP equipment, a cable modem, router, et cetera. And then there's this thing that most people kind of take for granted, and it's a whole industry, called outside plant. And that's the little ugly silver boxes you see on the curb, or the wires that are dangling overhead. That's a whole industry. You can Google buy telephone pole, right? And you'll get like all sorts of people who make telephone poles for a living. So it's a whole industry of how do I get the signals from your home or your business to some sort of central office. And from that central office, which used to be a telecom company, but today is kind of also turning into data centers, is sort of the pseudo-new central office. That's where everyone kind of comes together in one place in a local town or local city. And from there, they have really big network connections up into other towns and cities, right? So those in telecom world are called trunks. In ITSP worlds, they might be called fiber optic circuits, or interconnect points, peering points, et cetera, between two locations. Hopefully I haven't lost you guys. So far we got the customer's equipment, we got the wires that are outside, we got the networks that those wires plug into back in some building somewhere. We have what are called transit providers. Those are the guys who take it from Los Angeles all the way to all the way to New York, and it just kind of magically happens. They have longer connections that they share to get that all there. And somewhere along the line, people started hooking in data centers. And data centers really allowed you to not just peer between these networks, but also put servers. And those servers could provide features, and they could provide content, and they could provide services for customers. And within there is kind of where we wanted to live. And that was the part of the network we thought was broken. There was tons of activity on the CPE, right? I mean, this is when iPhones were coming out, and flip phones, and even the Motorola Razr, like there was tons of attention on that, right? Everyone was excited about this, but nobody was excited about building a 3G, antenna. Like that was not super exciting, except maybe to Ericsson and a couple other companies, right? So lots and lots of attention on the CPE devices. There's still probably not very much attention on outside plant since everything's going to wireless. Lots of attention on IP transit. You guys might remember the .com bus, the first one. A lot of that was people who were like, oh my God, the internet, everyone's going to use that. We better run as much fiber optic cable as we can for really, really tons of traffic and data. And they literally were digging up, roads and train tracks, sidewalls, and sideways, and anywhere they could run conduit and put cables in, and then hopefully sell it. And then, of course, they were a little too early, and we weren't quite ready for all that capacity. But that's where that came from. But all that stuff has to go to a data center or a server somewhere so that customers can actually use those facilities for some purpose, right? For providing phone service, or providing video services, or downloading things, or storing things, so on and so forth. And that's where I think Carl and I were the most interested in playing. As we said, that's where a lot of the brains of all this is, and that's where there hasn't really been a whole ton of investment on business phone service, but also just landline and communication service for a long time. It basically has been Cisco, Broadsoft, Lucent had some stuff there, and then you have typical systems like a 5ESS or DMS 100, which are older even. And the other thing that was kind of unique about our vision in this is we realized that the biggest change was that those servers in the data centers, sort of the old network used to be isolated. AT&T provided only AT&T services, right? They didn't connect to other third parties unless they had to, and they kind of hid it behind the scenes, but that wasn't what they sold you. Whereas today, it's a feature if you can buy a service that pitches to you that you can connect it to some other service, right? So it almost went from AT&T is the one who has to make the investment to hook into some third-party service to today, the phone provider gives you the keys to the kingdom and says you go connect it to whoever you want, right? And you can figure out neat things you can do with that. And I think that was our biggest driver. And if you go back to a KAZOOcon conference, which was the Free Switch conference and their second conference ever, one of my first presentations was getting events from your phone that were happening onto your web browser, right? So this is way before WebSockets and even like, you guys are all used to this now. If you use WebEx, you can see who's talking, but that wasn't a thing 15 years ago, right? You couldn't figure out who was making all that noise on the phone and mute them, right? That was not a feature. So the reason I'm kind of going down memory lane is that this picture hasn't really changed. And if you actually look at a lot of these items that are on this list, so for example, over here on the left, 3G, LTE, 5G services, right? We just announced one of these new ads yesterday, right? T-Mobile is a box to us there in the Grandio picture, right? They obviously provide a whole bunch of services that we attach to as well, but they really only solve this one problem in the whole communications ecosystem that we think businesses and service providers rely on. And it's even funny talking to them because one of the things we learned with them is, you know, one of the first things they said to me yesterday is they said, well, you need to keep track of who you give which SIM cards to. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, we need to know which customers have the SIM cards. And I said, but it's a multi-tenant system that we have, so we already know which customer's activating the card because they put the SIM card in the account. And they were like, oh, all of our other providers, they just dump it all in one account because they don't have a multi-tenant system, right? So it's really simple stuff like that that surprisingly is still kind of not available to most people in basic telecom backend switching systems that we kind of take for granted, and you guys even take for granted using our system, but it's still pretty ahead of the curve, and it's only one part of this whole ecosystem. So I go into this because I think sometimes we lose sight on the fact that that 2600 Hertz, Carl and myself, our team, we still have this common goal, right? This hasn't changed, and if we sometimes seem a little scatterbrained or our software seems buggy at times, it's because it's such a big project that what we really do is we look at what the market is demanding the most to build next so that we can keep the revenue coming in to keep building the different pieces. But we pride ourselves in building the pieces in a way that they last for a while so that they're not kind of fly-by-night shortcutted features. And sometimes that means they take a little longer. We get probably a lot more earfuls from people because it takes longer to do quote-unquote simple stuff. But we do it because we hope that we're not going to have to go back and adjust it for years if we're lucky. And that's kind of the intent. And actually this box at the top that says Kazoo is really just a summary box. This next slide is actually a breakdown of each of the things inside that box that to us represent an app or a in some cases a whole industry and set of apps, right? So for example on here, I don't expect you to be able to read this, but there is a section called Storefront. And Storefront is a hot area right now, but it was actually our original goal back in 2011. We wanted people to be able to self-sign up and use the system without having to speak to somebody. And we were way ahead of the curve on that. Nobody trusted that model. It was ripe with fraud. You know, we probably weren't ready to expose that when we did, because if any of you guys remember, we tried a KAZOO.io launch many years ago where you could actually do that. It's one of the first things we did. We were a little ahead of ourselves, but it turns out the whole market is now demanding this. Like a lot of the big players are trying to figure out how do I automate the onboarding process from clients who don't want to pick up the phone and talk to a sales rep. They want to sign up themselves, right? So that's kind of one of the demands. And what's happening is these apps that we're creating are really a representation of some of the different pieces that are on the screen. And admittedly, our app exchange is probably a little unorganized, so it's not always obvious that the app relates to this particular category on this sort of visual chart. But this is basically what we're building, right? And so we'll iterate over getting this message across to all of you over time, and we'll get better at that. But the actual vision probably it hasn't changed, and it's probably not going to change for many years, I suspect, to come. So why are we doing all this? Well, it's disruptive. It's disruptive, and it solves a problem. It's disruptive not because we just woke up one morning and were mad at the world, but because we didn't think the experience was good. That was probably the primary driver. And ironically, the primary driver for me is that everybody was focused on the end user experience. With iPhones coming out, they're like, look how cool this is. Everyone in the world can figure out how to use this. Meanwhile, those poor admins who have to manage the networks that those iPhones run on had the most archaic, horrible to use systems ever humanly created in terms of usability. Right? I mean, literally TTY terminals they're still using to program your line. For a while there, they were still using dot matrix printers at some of the telcos to print out service orders every morning so that they knew what had been ordered last night, and then some guy was taking the paper and entering it into another computer. I mean, this is crazy. In the late 90s, we're still doing this, in early 2000. It just didn't make any sense. So a lot of the systems were very disconnected. The other thing that blew me away is, if I'm ever having a bad day and you get a snarky response from me related to billing or pricing, it's this piece that sometimes I just, it's a lot for me to take in. Every single thing on this chart in the older telecom world, maybe 10 years ago, used to cost $500,000. Right? So it's really expensive. And I'm talking a call recording system. Used to, if you had a PBX, how many people installed PBX systems that attached to a separate voicemail system? All right, so you guys know what I'm talking about. These were expensive systems in every location, and you bought all these pieces separately. While I'm aware that the market itself is driving the prices down very rapidly, it is also good to pause for a moment and realize that we are basically taking millions and millions and millions of dollars of past investment, rebuilding it, and doing it in a way that's much more efficient, where we can drive the price down to a couple bucks, right, per user per month. So this is really disruptive, but we're also doing it in a way where we hope it's all in one interface, and we hope that it's all in one system, so that it feels good. It's fun to use, it's clear how to use it, it doesn't take a degree to figure out how to use it, and all the pieces work seamlessly together. And we often ourselves have to ask ourselves the age-old question, is it worth building this, or should we just buy or attach to something else? Right? Has someone else done this better? And most of the time we've said, you know what, for the core stuff we really need to build this. It's just not very seamless otherwise. So sometimes customers will come to us and they'll say, well, why don't you just use XYZ product off the shelf? And we look at it and we know that it takes almost as much work to integrate it as just to build some of the pieces ourselves. So we don't really, while we'll get the instant gratification by quickly attaching to it, we will be saddled later on with maintaining somebody else's product and keeping things going. And so we've really tended to build a lot of these pieces ourselves. So with that in mind, most of you guys come to me every year and you say, well, what's in it for me? What are you guys doing? What are we doing this year? How's this going to help my business? And that's a fair question, because we're all in this together. So all of these pieces, as they relate, the first problem we had to solve was we needed the basics. Right? We really needed to make sure your calls actually worked. They worked reliably. Those of you who have, Patrick's probably going to tell me I'm not supposed to say this in front of an audience, who some of you aren't customers yet, but there were days when the system didn't used to work. That we would reboot things constantly, that there were bugs all over the place on stability, we would have lengthy outages, and all sorts of horror stories. We had to work through those, and that was the priority. We really had to make sure, and we knew that, we needed to make sure that we were true to our roots, that this was supposed to be a redundant, failover, fault-tolerant system, and it wasn't worth building any cool features until we had that part right. So we would get a lot of pressure to build cool features because we understand that those sell, but we would kind of push back on some of that to make sure that the basics were there. To me, Carl's talk yesterday, if you didn't pick up on that, I know it was somewhat technical. Really, Kazoo 5.0 to us, once we swap out Big Couch for CouchDB and fix some of these AMQP issues that Luis has been working super hard on as well for performance and optimization, that's like the plumbing and the dream of the architecture from like 12 years ago finally being complete. And I really believe that that's the case at this point. So now we finally get to this cool point. I actually talked about this last year, but I was probably a little ahead of myself, where we really can spend a lot more time now on cool, fun features that we build on top. So in terms of this year, though, we're really excited to build cool features, but we realized one other thing that you guys have been telling us, which is you need help not just on keeping calls up and making sure they work, but on onboarding, on providing materials to your clients, on some of the business support services, such as invoicing and taxes, or managing debugging of client equipment if there's a problem, or provisioning continues to be a fun topic. And you also need to watch your labor costs, right? You need to be able to go into a site and get it set up quickly. And that's always been a dream of ours, but that we've never quite hit 100% on. We're probably closer to 90% on a lot of it. And so our goal for the remainder of this year is to actually get those things to 100%. And we have a roadmap that's got about 60 items on it for the remainder of the year. And we think that if we knock out all those items and we go back and we finesse a few of the UI components that are cumbersome, that you guys will truly be able to walk into a site and get out of there for 50 phones in 30 minutes. Those of you who came to the KAZOOcon in Broadway Studios 2 years ago saw me do a demo of my dream to do that with just the phone provisioning, and it still isn't quite there. So it's obviously taken us a while, but now we're even throwing in invoicing, quoting, like the whole 9 yards, right? So we want you to be able to get into a client site and get out quickly. And the idea behind that is to keep your labor costs down, but you also impress the client, because the clients have become, frankly, somewhat more impatient. They expect more. They expect it to be done properly and quicker. And then the other biggie, and I can't stress enough, especially for you, some of you new guys, how big this is. I know some of these features may feel raw and have some glitches when you use them. But this is the first year that we finally have pretty close to, I'm not going to say 100%, but it's pretty darn close to feature parity with some of the big guys, RingCentral, 8x8. Even if you look at some of the old popular switches from like Mitel or Avaya or ShoreTel, you'll see that the most popular features that people really depend on and make their buying decisions based on, we basically have them. A couple of them are clunky to turn on, but they're in there. So we're slowly working through making sure those are exposed to you, but we suspect that most people will find what they need here. So the next phase for us then this year is to make sure that you guys are empowered to do all those things. So a really simple example, we've had directed call pickup for years. That's the ability to grab a call that's ringing at a different person's extension and you hear it across the room, and you know that Sally over there is not sitting at her desk and it might be an important call, and you can dial a code to pick it up. But there was no UI to turn it on, and nobody had really tested it. Right? So that's the kind of thing where we're going back and we're saying, okay, this takes a day of work. We're going to polish this. We're going to ship this. So those features collectively, though, should allow you to set up a client with most of the features they want without having to contact us. Today, that usually ends up being a support ticket. How do I turn on this feature that I can't find in the UI, but I know you have? Right? We actually have a list of basically the majority of the tickets you guys have sent in that represent that, and we are cranking through those for the remainder of the year to try and polish all those items. So I'm going to get specific. Oh, and then the other piece is to allow you to debug yourself and automate these things yourself for common tasks, setting up new accounts, invoicing, service plans, etc. And then the last thing is I have enough features where you can start teasing these clients with things they never heard of, right? Things that are new, that our competitors do not have, your competitors do not have. And I think that's going to give you guys a big leg up. So I'm going to get specific, and I'm going to do it very quickly because I just got my 5-minute warning. I was late because Miriam told me I had to wear pants to my keynote, and I don't know how to wear pants, so I had to look up the instructions, so I apologize for that. So everything we do here is goes in one of these 4 categories. Patrick touched on this yesterday. We're either building something to help you guys, or we're building something to help your customers. We're building something behind the scenes that helps us, but inherently helps us keep the system running, which helps you. Or the new thing that we're starting to do is what I call business support, which is we're trying to start building stuff that helps you guys go to market and get out there and understand the business and the ecosystem, whether that's materials, comparisons, tricks, telling you that RingCentral has in fine print that if you're under 5 seats, they're going to outsource your install to somebody who's in a foreign country answering the phone instead of helping you in the US, right? That's actually on their website. Those are the kinds of things you guys can walk into a client, you can share with them and teach them so that you can win a deal. It's important to remember that every time you close a deal, you're helping us, right? So we are very motivated to make sure you guys don't lose clients. Sometimes people think that we're just ignoring you. It may be that the ask you have is too high and too big for us, but we are cognizant that our success is your success, and we thank you for everybody that you guys spend the time bringing in. So I'm going to run through this. Here's the stuff that's going to impact you And if you see something on here that intrigues you, I do not have the time to go through all these, so just make a note of it, and you're more than welcome to come up to me or Carl or anyone on the team and ask us what is this, and if they don't know, they'll help you find out. But the big topics you'll see up here is carrier-related and debug-related services that are self-service. So we're really trying to make sure that you can go into the portal and you can set up all the features on your numbers yourself. The other piece is provisioners getting a big overhaul. There's a talk on that, so you can go to that if you want to learn more about that. But that's a biggie. For those of you who have your own platform, you currently have to email us when you want to change your ACLs, your certs, turn on WebRTC, and a couple other things. We're automating that out so that you can do all those things yourself. So basically, you'll see a theme here, which is that you guys can do all of this on your own. Bring Your Own Carrier has been a product that has taken off. It was actually kind of built as an accident sort of thing for someone who needed it unexpectedly, and then everybody wanted it. We kind of built this product as a, I don't want to say a hack. We knew what it was and we knew what we were doing, but it wasn't also fully built. It was supposed to have different trunk groups, ways to manipulate the numbers when they come in and out, et cetera. And it really has never been all the things we dreamed it could be. So it's got enough use now that we're going to give that a big overhaul. And also, where's James? It's finally on the schedule, James, after how many years? 9 years. James has been asking to rewrite Trunk Store. Trunk Store is an original app we had for selling SIP trunks, and it is currently hobbling along. And really needs some help. But this one's also big because the work that some other team members have been doing, specifically Luis, I believe in this case, to optimize the system for speed, will now actually allow us, if you're technical and you know that we use FreeSwitch under the hood, this will actually allow us to bypass FreeSwitch and just route via Camellio for straight SIP trunking with just SIP packets. Yeah, which is pretty cool. So what that does to your performance is goes way up through the roof. So that's going to be really, really cool when we can do just straight SIP trunking, which is still popular. Folks who've used a cluster manager have been quite clear that it needs some help. It's not friendly. It does do what it needs to do. So our team has been using it religiously, and I've now gained a lot of faith in this tool actually working correctly. But it can be a little slow. When there are errors, people don't understand how to solve it themselves. And the UI itself needs a redesign, which it has mockups for, but we need to now implement those redesigns. The actual feature set, I believe, is actually very complete. Specifically, Sean and Clay have spent a ton of time working on this, and I think they've done a really good job. And they've worked with Carl to make sure it meshes with our packages and the other tools that are being built for all the stuff that was talked about in the ecosystem yesterday. So that's big. I am going to be a couple minutes over time here. I'll try to cruise through this. But cluster manager and also statistics on that. Now, I want to note that for 1 second because it's going to change your workflow. If you're on private cloud, global, or your own infrastructure, you're no longer going to contact us to help you with scheduled upgrades. Scheduled upgrades and downgrades are going to be and testing are going to be something you need to do on your own. That was actually how the product was always supposed to be, but because it was so hard to use the tools, we basically just had you guys email us and we did it for you. We're giving that control back to you. Most people have said that they wanted that anyway in the first place. They want to do the upgrades on their schedule. They want to feel comfortable doing the upgrades. They want to feel like they can test it somewhere on their own. So we're not only giving you that, but we have built 3 different sandbox environments. And those sandbox environments represent the next upcoming release, the current release, and the previous release. So whatever release you're on, you'll be able to test the latest version of that major branch on a system that's not yours that you don't have to maintain, but you'll still be able to try it out. Some of the stuff we're talking about this afternoon: full billing and invoicing and reporting, taxes and compliance, tax remittance, I should say. Integration into PayPal, Authorize.net, FreshBooks, and Stripe is on the roadmap. We are toying with the idea of shipping a support system with the product. Don't quote me on that one. We'll pretend that's not on this slide because it's undecided. But that is something we're tinkering with. At least the ability to report an issue from our interface for your clients is what we really are after there. And a financial health reporting tool. This one's a cool one. This will actually let you basically see account by account whether you're making money, right? So at the end of the day, you guys all need to make a revenue stream too to pay your bills and support your company. We understand that. We want to actually give you some tools that tell you whether you're actually doing that. Now, that's all the stuff that helps you. We have a whole other set of stuff that's going to help your customers. The biggest, most requested one after the desktop app, which is now shipping, is inbound screen pops, screen share integration, and somewhere on here is a full soft phone. Right? People are telling us that they want that on each desktop, especially that inbound screen pop. So an incoming call comes in, we check the caller ID, we open your CRM or whatever, grab some metadata if you want to do it that way, and we display it to the person who's calling in. You can also, of course, use that with the Zapier integration that Brett talked about yesterday to do some fancy stuff. This one right here, this multi-location support, I should have made it blink in the old GeoCities style. Multi-location support. This is a really big one. If you haven't put the pieces together, Carl yesterday talked about the ability to switch to home zones, account home zones, CouchDB. Our original vision was one cluster for the whole world. And there were some problems in the plumbing on how we built this that we couldn't achieve that. We're fixing those. And once those are fixed, this multi-location support will not only let you have one account that has multiple branch offices or multiple franchises or multiple offices in the same account, but for CDRs, for configurations, et cetera, each one can have their own menu, each one can have their own settings. In theory, this will be able to span worldwide. So the industry, as far as I know, still does not have a solution, if any, or a good solution for customers who have an office in London and an office in New York, because there's latency issues and there's quality issues and so on and so forth. I'm not going to say that we've cracked this nut completely once we launch this, but we've done a big piece where you can actually set it up and get it working and try it out. I'm sure we're going to find a whole bunch of new stuff that we run into once we do that, that people complain about, but generally speaking, that multi-location support opens a big, either a door or a Pandora's box, and we're going to find out which. The mobile app that we announced, did we talk about it? Is that later today? Anyone? Later today. Teased. We teased it. So later today, I think Carl's giving an actual demo of the new mobile app we talked about. What he's not going to show, but he might talk about, is there is actually a chat client or an SMS client in there. It's just hidden. So we're going to try and figure out how to make that not hidden. Yep, you get the idea. Talked about Google Cloud Print yesterday. Okay, now plumbing. We are actually building a self-service backup, restore, and clone feature. So we have been talking about this. Carl and I have been vetting some ideas on how to do this. This actually opens up a whole bunch of interesting opportunities, moving accounts between clusters, doing manual backups when somebody leaves, dealing with GDPR, giving them all their data in some format, so at least you can say you gave it to them, et cetera. So this actually is kind of a big deal, even though it was kind of a small ask originally. And templates is on that same theme, right? So that you can set up an account and it already has the defaults that your company normally ships. An SDK for the web phone is probably the only other huge highlight on here, and I'm going to cruise through this. And then finally is business support, these back-end materials that help you actually go into a client and close a deal. And we're going to try and make sure that not only do you close the deal, but you keep the client happy, you build some integrations, we update our docs. And where's Emily? I'm going to embarrass her on her first week. Emily's joining us. I think we already embarrassed her yesterday. We're going to do it again. She's there in the back. She's going to help us head up our new community initiative and our documentation initiative. We have heard loud and clear that our documentation needs work. Frankly, the issue is that we just haven't had the staff. So that's not an issue anymore, I don't believe. So now we're going to hopefully see some results out of that. That's a big initiative. Last but not least, I get asked a lot of times, we started as an open source project and people think that we've forgotten those roots, and we have not. The main issue we had is we needed a licensing engine, and we actually needed that for our paid software so that we can have some revenue stream for all of our clients, and we needed that to apply to everybody, our paid clients and the open source clients, right? So James has been working on that. It got a little bit stalled because there was a lot of competing contention on resources, but I intend to pick that up by the end of the year. By Q4, it is my hope that that full Erlang licensing engine will be completed. That should enable every app that we have to be accessible to anybody on any platform. So that's our goal. So the biggest change this has to you, it changes your responsibilities once we're done with all this. So today, we service a lot of support requests and a lot of tickets that are for debugging or configuration issues or even just manual configs. And it is our hope that by the end of Q3, you really shouldn't need to contact us for any normal course of business. You should actually be able to do it 100% in the UI. And that includes adding things to your service plans. It includes setting up new carriers. It includes debugging. Right? Even I'm hoping if we can get this in time that the provisioner overhaul, that one might take till Q4, that you'll be able to stream the logs from your phone. So if a phone's not acting correctly, you can actually see the logs from the phone on the provisioning service. So this really should give you full control over, I hope, every part of the system. And I think it makes people feel more empowered when they can learn how to do it themselves. And I think that's a good thing in our mission for building all these crazy pieces. So that's what I got. Only 7 minutes behind after a 10-minute late start. So again, thank you guys all for coming along for this ride. I don't know how else to thank you enough. Our vision has not changed. We are still trying to build the same exact thing that we were 12 years ago, and I'd say we're at that probably 70 or 80% mark on most of those items, so I'm pretty excited about that. And this year I'm hoping to get them closer to 100. So thank you for coming along on the ride, and I appreciate you all reinventing telecom. It's pretty cool, so thanks.